What's happening, everybody? Welcome to today's live stream. Super excited. You are now tuned into 133.7 Novu FM, the notifications platform empowering engineers to deliver the notifications that their product teams need. We've got some very special guests today. Super excited about this. Listen, whether you're sending email in the air through aviation or keeping your users informed through SMS text messages and keeping it minty fresh, we've got hailing from Austin, Texas, the one and only Ryan Reynolds. Yay! Furthermore, coming through from Nolens, Louisiana, known to some of us as Bulbancha, the one and only Stephen Ward.
Hey everyone, thanks Kevin for the intro.
Yay! I really need to have some like clapping and applause and audience music ready for these streams. We'll do that for the next one. Iterate, right? Um, Super stoked for this today because with Novu V2, what we're now just referring to as Novu, being released. This new approach of code first notifications and workflows that are really empowering engineers where they need to be empowered and removing that friction for collaboration with the product teams. Um, it's a new step, it's a new direction that engineering teams haven't had access to in the past. And it really smooths out and makes it a lot easier to implement notifications at scale, especially at the enterprise level, where there's multiple teams touching on notifications and enabling and empowering that collaboration at confidence. Let's start off with the first and most important thing, right? This is sort of the core value proposition is that we're empowering engineering teams to deliver the notifications platform that their product teams will eventually use. And given that piece of collaboration, one of the things that we keep hearing from customers is that their current existing homegrown notification solutions aren't really built to scale, right? You've got multiple teams, like a mobile team, for example, that cares about push notifications, and so they build that for themselves. And then you've got a text messaging team that wants SMS and to send those kinds of notifications. And they're building their own notification systems internally. And all of a sudden, you've got five, six different notification platforms. And that really becomes a hindrance and a barrier towards a unified collaboration. Ryan, if you'll jump in, please tell us a little bit about how how does Novu enable and empower that collaboration between engineering and product teams that are looking to build their notifications infrastructure?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kevin. I think, even before that, starting with what that looks like at most companies today, and I'm sure many of you joining the call today are in a similar spot. As Kevin mentioned, usually it's pretty easy to stand up notifications inside of an app. Typically, that's either email or SMS. And the reason for that is notifications are just expected today. They're expected by your company, of course. They're going to be expected by your PMs, and they're expected by your users. I mean, who of us doesn't receive at least a notification? I was going to say a day, but likely an hour or every 10 minutes, depending on what application you're in. The struggle that we see is the collaboration between the folks who are actually creating those notifications, meaning standing them up from an engineering perspective, getting them plumbed and plugged in on the back end, and then folks that are actually authoring the content and measuring the engagement or ultimate effect of those. And at the end of the day, it's really a black box where the two aren't communicating. As a PM, I might pass off specs to my engineering team to build a notification. You'll provide me with some sort of mock-up or spec or whatever that may be. And then we really have to go through this series of revisions where I may be asking, hey, can you capitalize this letter or change this word? And what we see is it just causes way too much friction in a process that simply should be managed in a different way. So to come back to your initial question, Kevin, the way that Novu looks at that and what this major release really addresses is how do we provide engineering teams the flexibility and speed to basically create your own internal notification platform that provides product teams with like a really slick and easy to use UI where they can edit the content of the notifications, they can change the notifications full stop themselves, save that back without ever modifying or potentially, breaking anything in terms of that plugging or the connectivity on the engineering side. And then, of course, see the results of how they're impacting users, how they're, affecting engagement or whatever the goal is. Did that answer your question, Kevin?
No, that absolutely answers it. And so I guess the follow-up question to that being, okay, instead of having to build this internally, why why would I just not just build this in-house? I mean, obviously this is a question that we get a lot, right? If we already have some form of email notifications, why wouldn't we just go with that and instead use Novu?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe what would be helpful is and might be very interesting for everyone on the call can kind of pull back the curtain a bit and show you what we typically walk through an organization that's struggling with these problems on, and have a little bit of a discussion there if that sounds like it would be helpful. All right. You see my screen? Perfect. So we'll start by taking, a massive step or even a jump back, right? So the core issue that, most organizations are struggling with is simply there's a lot to do, right? I'd say more than ever, which is kind of corny, but it's simply the truth. You're likely working on some sort of major architecture refactor. You're trying to release, the next big best of breed, cloud application. You're probably adopting new internal technologies yourself. There's just a ton to do. And the question becomes like, well, how does your work on notifications either combine with that, assist with that, or we would say probably detract from that in some ways. So the way that I say that it's a detractors because notifications again have grown in the shadows without a ton of oversight, right? And this is what I was talking about earlier, where today it's like every feature or every product just needs notifications. That's the way it is. So because they're table stakes, they've exploded with either the number of components you have in your application or the applications yourself. Again, relatively easy things to set up initially. So you have all these disconnected teams, depending on your company, spread across different geographies and projects that are creating these notifications in silos. The complexity and the disconnection only increases when you start to pull in things like, okay, email isn't enough. We want SMS and we want push. And then on top of that, you have, okay, well, we need to provide some better features here because users are demanding it. They need to be able to select from a rich choice of preferences, including things like when they want the notification delivered to them, et cetera, et cetera. So it begins to build and build and build. And then again, you all this culminates in this really inefficient collaboration where you're going back and forth on, improving or creating a single notification. And then all combined, it's like you don't even know what exists out there today. So it's impossible to have any cohesive strategy when it comes to notifications themselves. So we refer to this internally as notification chaos, right? And at the end of the day, what it is it's just a really friction-rich environment between not only product and engineering, but really between the applications themselves, because they have these notifications that were built by different teams under different methodologies, crammed into one single space. They're really expensive to maintain, and they're really brittle, right? So going back to kind of what we talked about briefly earlier is this concept of I'm putting out this product or this feature, I have to have notifications. Everyone's expecting it. So, okay, I just build it, right? And it's fairly easy to stand up a simple email or even add email and SMS. The problem that we see a lot of companies and teams run into is really this. So once you have this culmination of not only different types of channels, but also the different requirements, which are preferences or some sort of localization type objective, it becomes too much. And you start looking at options for either rebuilding the whole thing under a unified system, or quite often looking for solutions like Novu. So to put a bow around it, you come to this decision where it's, do we treat our notifications as just this thing that we have to have because everyone wants it? Or do we invest a lot in it, which ultimately means, let's be frank here, right? Notifications are not the core aim of most companies, right? They're the core aim of Novu, but for most companies, you are not a notification product, right? Notifications are ancillary to your product. They are a feature. So you have to divert and distract your engineering effort away from cool new things that you could be building into your app itself, right? So the way this kind of crystallizes for a lot of the companies we talk to is you don't choose to build, unless you're very unique, your own billing system or your own customer data platform or authentication. You choose from what's already out there, right? There are great companies that have already done this. And we look at Novu in the same way. So why build Stripe when it already exists? Why build a notification platform when Novu exists? So I think this is, as we start to talk about the new release and Novu in 2024, this is where it starts to become extremely interesting. And why that is before this release, you've really only had two options. Option one is, I'm going to build this whole thing myself. I'm going to DIY it. I'm going to set it aside at, a couple engineers or an engineering team, and we're going to build out our own notification framework and platform. The other option is there are other vendors. Novu isn't alone. I mean, this is a big problem that most of you are struggling with. So there are other off-the-shelf solutions that you can adopt, right? When we go back to the do-it-yourself approach, the benefits to that are awesome, right? You have total flexibility, as you would expect, because you're building each component yourself. And in the same vein, you can interact with all of your local data, all of your systems that sit inside of your domain, again, because you own this thing, you're building it. The downsides to this approach are kind of the same, right? You're building the thing. So as we talked about, you're going to need an engineering team to do it. Typically, it's not going to satisfy the less technical users that might be involved in the process, creating that friction we talked about earlier. And then you have to maintain this thing. And I think, that's software dev 101 of like, the maintenance usually ends up taking you way more time and being more of a headache than building the product itself. Then you look at the off the shelf or commercially available solutions. Benefits to that are really easy to use for non-technical personas. Most of them have been built specifically, spun out of like a marketing automation tool almost. You're going to have all the features that you need because again, you have a company building this thing for you, and you're going to have relatively, both low infrastructure requirements because they're hosted, and you're not going to have to build a ton of things yourself. The downsides to that are, I mean, what you see is what you're going to get. This was built for essentially everyone, which almost means it was built for no one specific. It's not going to fit your company or your use cases one to one. You're going to have to make some trade-offs. And then you really don't have a solution that fits within either role. It's not going to be 100%, non or less technical. It's of course not going to be 100% dev. Everyone is going to have some sort of friction point in using it. What's interesting and, we think extremely revolutionary, even if you will, about this new release with Novu is we're actually sitting somewhere in the middle. And that's a lot of what this code first approach allows. You maintain the flexibility that you get with the DIY solution and the ability to interact and hydrate local data, because the code for your notifications is going to live inside of your environment, inside of your existing code base. But ultimately, what you're creating, what the product is allowing, is this web studio, which you'll see in a moment, that's very slick and usable by someone who just needs to go in and modify a notification or view the impact or progress of them. And then of course, as you'd expect, we're building all the features for you. You don't have to worry about that. Like, that is our core competency alongside the infrastructure. You don't have to worry about scale. You don't have to worry about setting up queuing systems and things like that to make sure that you're performant and scalable. Those are things that we handle for you. So this is what we're really excited about, and frankly, we almost wish we did it earlier, but it's still kind of a head scratcher that others haven't taken this approach yet. So what do you think of that, Kevin? Did that help answer your question? And a 30-second question turned into a 15-minute response.
Yeah, I really want to encapsulate that, right? Because if you'll go back to the notification chaos slide, I think slide 9, the things that you pointed out to are the existing notification approach of DIYing. It introduces friction between your product and engineering and dev teams who are building the notifications, and then teams that are actually managing notifications, messaging, having influence on cadence, timing, etc. It's expensive because it takes that engineering effort just to make a basic change to your notification messaging, right? And then ultimately, it's brittle. All of the integrations with the different notifications providers, whether that's email, SMS, chat, in-app, Slack, whatever that might be, it's brittle. And so you're introducing chaos to your notification platform. One might even call it chaos theory of notifications. Press F in chat and drop any of the notifications problems that your teams have run into as you're deploying your notifications infrastructure. If you've encountered any of these challenges, notifications being brittle, the friction between product and engineering teams, and the expense and the cost of engineering effort to build your notifications infrastructure, leave a comment down in chat below. I think we've got Stephen Ward about to share us a little bit of a demo here, product walkthrough. Is that what I'm feeling?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kevin. So yeah, definitely want to show you a little bit about what Ryan just talked through. Really sort of narrowing in on the concept of this hybrid approach to having both an engineering focus, but also enabling product and other non-engineering resources to utilize a solution. Can everyone see my screen here?
We can.
Okay, perfect. So as Ryan mentioned, we have this amazing, what we call our local studio. This studio is able to be presented based off of how what we call workflows are architected from a engineering perspective. So those workflows will be built out in your code base. And this is actually a Express web application server, or excuse me, Next.js web application server use case here. But we support other similar frameworks like Express, Remix, Svelte. So it's really just building this like sort of static, but also interactive dev studio that people can interact with based off of how those workflows are architected from an engineering perspective. So you'll see across the left here, I have 4 different sort of use cases. Each workflow has what we call steps that are associated with it. Steps can be channels, they can be an email, they can be a push, an SMS, an in-app notification. And then steps also include what we call action items as well. So it can be a digest or a delay too. So in this use case, I'll show here, we have an email template. So this email exists in your code base. And I'll jump to the code side of things here shortly. But this email is scaffolded. It's the structure of it is built out in your code base. And as you see here on the left, or excuse me, on the right, these step controls, these are the values, the interactive data that product and other non-engineering folks can interact with. So just sort of imagine a scenario where you've templated an email, maybe has a couple different logos that you want to interact with. In this case, from an engineering perspective, I've exposed those logos that have been approved. I can toggle between those and sort of choose if that makes sense to me. I can interact with the text as well in real time. This is being rendered on the Express side, and then the return of that is this compiled HTML in this case for the email use cases. In addition to this, I can, a lot of emails are going to have buttons. They may have dividers. They may have sections that are included as well. I can choose to either expose that button or to keep it hidden. I can influence what the text of that button is. So it's really up to you to define what those inputs or what those controls are going to look like and how you can interact with them in this Dev Studio experience. So as I had mentioned earlier as well, there are these non-channel steps too. So with a delay, maybe I want to send sort of like a weekly email. You can also expose those controls too. So if at any point in time you want to update the frequency of this, you have that full flexibility and functionality to do that. And so this isn't just geared towards, emails as the main sort of channel. We also have, the push notifications that are here too, that you can just the same way you can interact with those step controls, the SMS too. So it's really that full suite end-to-end workflow building that you can do from a programmatic perspective, expose that on the front end through this studio experience. And then once the studio is, once you're happy with what it looks like in there, we do have a synchronization process from, your local instance or from a hosted application that you have running, pushing to the Novu cloud itself. So that's, many different use cases. It's really easy to build these out. I will sort of briefly walk through what some of that code setup looks like, and then we can sort of take it from there. So going back to the first use case I showed, which was an email template. So
Pause real quick before we do that.
Yeah.
Would you mind zooming in to like 125% on your code editor?
Yeah, give me 1 second here.
Command plus. Perfect.
Is that better?
Much better.
Okay. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for keeping me on my toes here.
There we go.
So, as one of the first use cases I showed was an email template. From a programmatic perspective, this use case is a React email use case. So you'll see that I'm importing these React email components. So just sort of like imagine that you're already using, it doesn't have to be React email. It can be MGM or MJM. It can be any other email sort of generator that you use internally. Really the only thing that I'm doing from like a new code perspective is introducing, in this case with the React, it's these different sort of props that are defining what the controls are. And so I already have the React email HTML set up here. And really all I'm doing is exposing those control props within the code itself. And so that I know that these are going to be fields that I'm exposing to the end users in the studio experience so that they can add whatever relevant content needs to be there. And so really all I'm doing at that point is exporting this rendered HTML as a function and ultimately bringing it into what we call that workflow. So the workflows that I showed you across the left-hand side of the studio, this is where you're going to define how those workflows are set up. So at the top here, you'll see we do have this Novu SDK, this framework SDK, where you're going to import the workflow. The workflow is that defined function that we have that essentially allows you to build out the different steps that are associated with it. So remember, I showed the channel type steps with email, SMS, push, etc. And then also you can use those action type steps with digest and delay. So in this case, everything's running async here. I'm passing in the step, but also payload as well, because all notification or you can enable payloads to be sent with those workflow events. So in this case, I have a delay that's set up here. I define the name of that delay. In this case, I want to expose those controls that I've defined to be editable values within that delay. And then same goes for email, similar function structure, but in this case, I'm returning a subject as well as the body. And so the body is that previous file email that I had showed, that is that exported rendered function, and then the controls as well as the payload that we defined there too. And so from a control perspective, and as well as the payloads, we are able to define those through either a JSON schema or through Zod. So those are two schemas that we're currently interacting with. Both are supported. Zod would be an approach where like type safety is very critical to you, to where you would define those different schemas within a separate file and then import those constants as you see fit for type safety. But you can also, as you see here, I have this more of the JSON schema, which is actually those properties defined within the confines of that workflow as well. And so the great thing about this is that, I as an engineer, I'm not worrying about having to input like hard coded text. I'm not having to worry about making sure that I input the correct, header image into the email template. I'm not worrying about like what the exact verbiage is that I had to use for an SMS push. Really, all I'm doing is building that scaffolding of what the workflow templates and channels need to be, and then from there, allowing the people that are really going to be involved with making sure the end delivery is the way that it needs to look. Those are going to be the ones that are interacting with the studio experience to make sure that everything is set up correctly. And so in the event, like I don't have to have that back and forth with engineering to, hey, I need you to update this text, or I need you to, do any sort of other code change, which would then have to go through, version control, approvals, push to through your SDLC. So it's really enabling that effective collaboration between the two parties without overwhelming either one.
Really digging that. This is super cool, and I already hear the questions coming in, right? So, for example, one of the common questions that we get from prospects that are looking to use us is, how would I actually get the data, like a username, or if I'm an airline, like a user's loyalty program number, and then add that to the notification that I'm sending, right? Talk to me about that data retrieval or that data hydration.
Yeah, great question, Kevin. So, as far as the data retrieval and like in real time, when I'm triggering these workflow events, I need to make sure that that real-time data from the different users and subscribers is accurate and pulled in directly. So the brilliant thing about Novu is that um, this is code that you're embedding into your existing code base. And so the mechanisms that you're currently using to fetch data from your various data sources, your warehouses, your anything other hosted data services that you use, you're going to be able to tap into those existing mechanisms, approved mechanisms that you have in place, and then reference those within either the body of the message or the subject of the message. It really just depends on how you want to define and where you want to input those values. But there's no like secondary data source that Novu requires in order to bring in like that just in time, like a rehydrated data set. It's really just tapping into your existing mechanisms to then embed that within the Novu SDK, within how the workflow is constructed. I see one. Yes, MJML is another email framework you could use too. Yeah, Kevin, you're on mute.
Man, I was saying the most brilliant stuff off cam. It's great. Yeah, no. So English had that question. Can we use other email frameworks like MJML? obviously Stephen said we can look. It's important to use a modern content framework like MJ Mail, React Email, Vue Email, or Mazel, whatever that might be. That's as close to your front end stack as possible. Allows reusing a lot of that existing application logic and design tokens as part of your workflow. Um, the keyword there is reusing. So this is again one of the other questions that keep coming up, right? Um, Reusability. Can you talk to us, Stephen, a little bit about the reusability of Novu? Right. Problem with a lot of these companies and a lot of the current implementations is that they're implemented by feature teams on whatever independently. So there's like five different ecosystems for sending notifications. It's not reusable. There's not a way to send it and have a unified branding or unified content structure for notifications. How does Novo help with that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kevin. So yeah, to your point, Ryan and I talk to a lot of organizations that have, maybe there are multiple components to whether it's a single application or multiple applications that a company has, depending on their size. Everybody's sort of doing their own flavor of maybe an email notification, maybe at most in addition to that, they also have a like an SMS. So, and they're kind of setting these things up on their own. The great thing about Novu, a couple things is from a provider perspective. So from a channel perspective, having a single API to manage all of those different integrations for those different providers is really key to manage within Novu, so that you have good consistent track of what providers are being used, and you can associate those to different workflows. But as important as well is that everything that you see here being built out is definitely reusable and is also, as you're seeing here, importable. So, what we're finding some companies will do is they'll import existing workflows or existing language or logic that they have from other notification workflows, and they'll import that into this existing like workflows client facing file here to reference that, so that this is the source of truth for all of the outgoing notifications. You can consolidate and reference that as much as needed across multiple workflows, as long as you're importing it into this file here. But also, yeah, it's as you have different workflows that you're going to be building, but you have, like I showed you, that Stack Overflow use case. This is a very common template that may be used across multiple notifications or workflows in your organization. So it's something that once it's been built out, the controls have been defined. You can reuse that across any other workflows that are built out across your whole notifications infrastructure. So it's really, the powerful thing is the engineering. Like, we hear companies saying they don't have good control over who's doing what and how they're doing it. Novu really does consolidate the infrastructure and brings it in to one consolidated place, so that you can keep track of those cases where there's different language and different things being built out across the notification channels.
Love it. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see this sort of consolidate, expand. Is it a centralized versus a point solution happening in cyclical forms through tech? If you're just joining, listen, you guys already missed the party. We're about to close this up in the next 5 or so minutes. But we do have a couple more questions getting dropped in YouTube chat. So if you have any questions for Stephen Ward or Ryan Reynolds, do so in the comments section now. We're going to get to these last couple of questions and then wrap this up. Stephen, we've got this question from Old Dough on YouTube. Old Dough, not new dough, not sourdough, just old dough. If we already have a homegrown user preference system, can we use that instead of the Novu built-in user preference API? They've done all this work already.
That's a great question. So we have this concept coming out called Inbox, which is our sort of built out components or flavor of what a notification. Yeah, so it's something you can existingly use, or if it's something you want to potentially look into enhancing, or want some feedback on how Novu's approaching it. We do have this inbox concept coming out that is something to be on the lookout for in the next week or two. But yeah, if you already have your homegrown system and you're happy with how that's set up, you can certainly use that.
Old dough does not want to use the new features. They want to use the old dough.
The old dough, exactly. So keep it going the same way as you see fit, and yeah, we can advise on anything that comes up along the way, and also introduce you to how Novu's approaching this inbox in-app and user notification preference setup.
Excellent. We've got one more question here from CodeBits. CodeBits wants to know, can I use some of my previously built workflows? Can they be consumed from NPM? I want to reuse the bits that have already been built.
Yeah, that is a great question. So sort of like a backwards compatibility from the originally built out workflows into this new code first approach. I'm assuming that's what the question is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we
We're all about
absolutely,
that backwards compatibility.
yeah, exactly. So we don't want to interrupt or make it more difficult for our current Novu customers and users that have recently built out their workflows. So yeah, we can definitely. I know we're running up on time here, but we can definitely get in a little deeper there on how that would be set up. But yeah, ultimately they can still be consumed through the same sort of new interface that I showed you here.
Absolutely. And listen, if you have those kinds of questions talking about your implementation, what you've already built out in notifications, listen, you've got the dream team right here, Stephen Ward and Ryan Reynolds, answering all of your questions on this one live stream. But email us, schedule a time to discuss. I'll drop the link to the book a meeting in chat. But go ahead, grab some time, talk to our team to discuss your particular implementation of notifications, because that's the thing, right? Every notification implementation is different. And if you've already built something in-house, there's going to be a way that Novu not just fits in, but also elevates what's possible in your notifications platform. We're going to end there. We have one last question based on that, actually. This is actually quite interesting. Adventurous Ian has wandered in adventurously into the land of notifications platform infrastructure. And so Ian's asking, what is Novu? If anybody would like to join in and answer that question from Ian, that would be lovely. Green Lantern.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer this one. I didn't know if you still have me backstage, Kevin. I've been
All
hidden.
out, Ryan. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? Speaking of backstage, you just mentioned backstage. We're looking at some integrations with Spotify's backstage platform. If you guys have any interest in learning about how Novu and notifications implements with backstage, send us email, send us questions in Discord and chat. Go ahead, please. The man himself.
Yeah, for sure. Adventurous, and I mean the easiest way to answer the question of what is Novu. Novu is a way for you to easily create a notification system that is built by developers, but then consumed by your product folks. So it's the infrastructure and the tooling, and then the vehicle to actually deliver the notifications themselves.
Sweet.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Yep.
Yeah. Stole the words right out of my copy swipe file. Thanks everybody for joining. We will see you 2 weeks from now on the next live stream. Follow Discord, get the chat, book a meeting with Ryan Reynolds and Stephen Ward for your notifications infrastructure platform.